Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ginger Avila, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a director here at Jobs for the Future, and I'd like to welcome you to the Apprenticeship Approach, Preparing the Next Generation of Educators, presented by the Youth Apprenticeship Works Community of Practice. Schools across the country are facing a shortage of at least 300,000 teachers and staff. Students need qualified teachers who reflect the diversity of our communities, and future teachers need affordable and effective pathways into the profession. Registered teacher apprenticeship programs allow individuals, including those already working in schools like teaching assistants or paraprofessionals, to earn while they learn, receiving pay while they gain teaching skills with the supervision of a mentor teacher, and complete coursework to earn their teaching licensure. This allows teachers to gain robust experience in the classroom working with students and makes becoming a teacher more affordable. In fall of 2022, the Biden administration announced public and private sector actions to strengthen teaching professions and help schools fill vacancies, including expanding to high-quality programs like Registered Apprenticeship that prepare and support teachers. Since that time, registered apprenticeship programs within the education sector have grown across the country. Today, we're going to hear from our intermediary partners and the practitioners that they've worked with to develop educator apprenticeship pathways to share their experiences and strategies that contribute to the successful design, launch, and implementation of an educator apprenticeship pathway. I'd like to do a brief intro to our panelists who will share a little bit more about themselves in just a moment. Our panel today is going to be moderated by Dr. Jonathan Payne, who is a director here at Jobs for the Future. And our panel will consist of Rebecca Hollister, a subject matter expert and project manager for the Institute for American Apprenticeships, Yvonne Tran, a program manager for the Center for Collaborative Education, and MK Sagaria Barrett, senior manager of special projects at CareerWise Colorado. And Dr. Margarita Tovar, Chief Talent Officer at Summit School District in Frisco, Colorado. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Ginger. Thank you all for being here today. And thank you in advance to this great panel. I'm really excited to be able to facilitate this opportunity. And we're bringing this panel together today because they bring both a host of experience, both in the implementation as well as in the design, and they bring that experience from several different levels. And I'll let them introduce themselves, but essentially we have everyone from Rebecca, who's working at a national intermediary level, all the way to Margarita, who is working at the district level. And so from that range of perspectives, as well as from that range of experiences in implementing, designing, and facilitating the use of apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship as a talent development strategy for educators and our education staff. This panel is going to, I hope, help all of you who are in the audience today understand how this sort of comes about, and also hopefully you see yourself and your role in your system in our panel members. So I guess brief intro of myself, Jonathan Payne, again, director here at JFF. I come from a background in K-12 education, where I was a high school chemistry and engineering teacher. So education is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I've been working at JFF now for 7 years in youth apprenticeship, and now on the other side of the desk in educator apprenticeship. So it's a really exciting opportunity to be here today to facilitate this panel. Rebecca, I think I'll turn to you to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. Rebecca Hollister with the Institute for American Apprenticeship, and our national nonprofit has been in existence over 20 years, working in the workforce development space with a focus on registered apprenticeship. And I've been here for about 3 years, but prior to that, I was a classroom teacher for 17 years. So also very moved by the mission and very, very excited to be here. And I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne, who I've had the pleasure of working with from the Center for Collaborative Education, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Rebecca. So my name is Yvonne Tran, and I go by she, hers. I serve as program manager for the Center for Collaborative Education, a national nonprofit organization that serves as an intermediary and program sponsor for the teacher apprenticeship program that we're running. We successfully got the first teacher apprenticeship in California registered with DOL and now waiting state approval. And our main objective in this pathway is to amplify the voice of community colleges and their students. And so I'll pass it on to MK.
Hello, everyone. I'm MK Sagaria Barrett, she, her, with CareerWise Colorado. CareerWise is a youth apprenticeship intermediary, and we work across the United States, and my work focuses specifically here in Colorado. We have had a paraprofessional apprenticeship for high school students in Colorado for about 5 years, and thanks to legislation that was recently passed that allows for our Department of Education to create a pathway to licensure through apprenticeship. We are launching a program with 12 school districts across the state who are really implementing this as we speak. So I'll hand it over to one of those districts, Summit School District, and Margarita.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on wherever you are watching us. My name is Margarita Tovar. I am the proud Chief Talent Officer at Summit School District. Summit is located right in the heart of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. We have around 3,300 students. We're considered a rural school district. And my background is also in education. I started off as a paraprofessional in Houston ISD and worked my way through becoming a principal supervisor. And 2 years ago, I had the privilege to move here to Summit. I had never seen the snow prior, but now I've survived 2 winters. So I'm here for the long haul, but I'm grateful for partners like CareerWise who have supported these efforts. And I'll share more about Summit's vision for growing our own and how this model is supporting one of those areas.
Margarita, I'm really glad that you've made it through those 2 Colorado winters because it allows you to be here today. So again, I think that this is the great opportunity for this panel because Rebecca is coming from IAA, a national intermediary. She's worked with Yvonne. Yvonne comes from a national intermediary who's worked at the state level. MK, again, a national intermediary, but really drilling in on that into Colorado. And working directly with Margarita, who's coming from a district. So we have, that whole host, that whole spectrum of perspectives on this. And I think that this is emblematic of the fact that we now have like 30, I think over 30 states have one type of educator apprenticeship or another. That is a national movement. And and everybody on this call is part of that national movement. I think everybody that's listening is interested in that national movement and excited by that. And so I think I think the first question I'd love to ask our panel is what excites you about educator apprenticeship, about the way in which youth apprenticeship can dovetail with educator apprenticeship, and what your vision for the future of that is. And I think, Margarita, I'd love to lead with you, if you don't mind.
Of course. For me, this work is personal. I started my career, as I shared, as a paraprofessional, but I have been financially contributing to my household since I was 16. And so teaching was a way that I saw that I could enter the middle class. However, I had to work while I was going to college. And this opportunity to ensure that students are not having to take that time to be in an internship traditional model where they have to give up working is super exciting for me personally as well, because I see my work as a way to ensure financial mobility for our students and then also contribute to the issues that we're facing in the workforce. As I mentioned in Summit, we're committed to ensuring that we grow our own because we know that research shows that most teachers tend to teach within 60 miles or less of where they reside. And so we have 3 pipelines that we're looking to grow. One is the student to teacher pipeline through concurrent enrollment. And then 2 is that paraprofessional to teacher pipeline, and that's where the apprenticeship model comes in, at least for us in Summit. We have 2 apprentices that we're looking to transition from the current paraprofessional role into the apprenticeship role. And they are both Summit graduates, so we're super excited to give them that opportunity to remain committed to our county. And then the third pipeline that we have is the teacher to leader pipeline. We have a pilot right now where we have the assistant principal acting as principal for 2 years, and the principal went back to the classroom to run an extended year model. And so we're trying innovative things here at Summit, and this section of the apprenticeship model just fit right in.
And then I'll jump in, and I think what Dr. Margarita Tovar shared is exactly what we are experiencing kind of on the program level. We are hearing from districts that this is a great opportunity to address both their current educator shortages, so students filling in as apprentices becoming employees in their districts, filling in these shortages and vacancies that they have in their classified positions, wherever the students need support in. And then it also helps to start build that long-term relationship to secure teachers for their future shortages. So it's truly a pipeline that follows the apprentice, and so that way the community and the districts are able to fill both the current and the future shortages. I think also something that was mentioned was the student-centered approach to this type of teacher development. It invites diverse students from the local community to enter and stay in the teaching profession. So truly a grow your own model that can be achieved with an apprenticeship design. And then I think lastly, we're just very excited about the strength and collaboration across sectors. When we talk to community colleges, that prepared teachers, we ask them, do you know that if they actually become teachers? And they say, no, we actually don't. There's all these silos that exist within the teacher education pathway where the sectors don't interact with each other. I asked the districts, do you know if your teachers come from the community colleges or started their work there? They also say, no, we don't know. And so there is this disconnect that I think with the apprenticeship program, they're able to really create a space and collaborate together and communicate with each other to follow these students along the pathway, so that there truly is a collaboration and partnership that isn't currently happening. So that is something very exciting for us.
I love that. And by the way, thank you for jumping in the panel conversation. So absolutely feel free to jump in on and yes and no, but definitely welcome that interactive participation. What I'm hearing is that this is a really great opportunity to develop talent locally. And which I think is especially valuable for rural communities, and it essentially will help to address some of the extractive economies that exist for that brain drain that rural communities often feel. And I think that Yvonne, I love what you said about really intentionally connecting systems, so that we have so that we're both helping people navigate with intention and also being intentional about the way in which we connect across education and workforce development, like across education and into education. Those sound like really great successes. I'm wondering if we can bring that up a level to talk about broader, bigger, maybe like bigger or more, broad successes. Rebecca, I'm wondering if I could ask you, like, what's been your biggest success so far from a sort of a national intermediary lens?
Absolutely. So getting the first apprenticeship in California, Yvonne, was a big win. But I think even higher than that, seeing this sort of shift in thinking, coming from the education space where there was sort of one way that you entered teaching, right? You went to a 4-year institution, you got a degree, you became a teacher, and I think that can be minds can be hard, it can be hard to shift the thinking behind that. But as I've had these conversations, it's really amazing sort of how everyone across districts are embracing this. And I think some of that is, Dr. Margarita, you talked about increasing access for those who may not be able to enter those programs. But I think what it also does for districts and local communities is really creates this customized training. I mean, if you think about it, teaching is sort of all about mentorship and creating relationships with students, and apprenticeship is just a framework for that, right? So I think it really has the ability to strengthen what training for teachers is, right? If I think back to my student teaching days, those were when I got the most out of my training. And essentially, an apprenticeship does that from day one. And I think the biggest success has been helping, school districts and intermediary sponsors sort of embrace that and really design training that is super flexible and customizable across several roles, right? And have this sort of big picture view of how one role might feed into the other, and how we can stack these. And it gains a lot of interest, and I've seen a lot of innovative thinking around leveraging the apprenticeship model.
I'll chime in there on successes. In our context in Colorado, I would say one of the biggest successes is that this started as an idea and is actually coming to fruition. And that's amazing to see. CareerWise helped write some bill language, did a lot of policy work to make this possible. The legislation that has enabled the apprenticeship work in teaching. And at a high level, that includes an apprentice or a teacher candidate, an apprentice pursuing a bachelor's degree that is apprentice friendly, working alongside a mentor, being employed at the district throughout the duration, and of course, this being registered, a registered program. So that coming to fruition is just a lot of work. And then second of all, another success has been the collaboration and the kind of synergy that we've seen around this work. So really working with our Department of Education, our state apprenticeship agency, the districts that are excited about this, our higher ed institutions. There's so much momentum, and that's really, really exciting. And those partnerships can't be overlooked.
Yeah, MK, I think that those partnerships, I think on top are so incredibly important. I think that, Rebecca, what you said about the opportunity for educator apprenticeships to really break down the barriers to access across all levels of our education system, to the barriers to entry, and to ultimately, I think there's an opportunity here to have a teaching pool that looks and shares the same lived experience as their students, in a way that the sort of those exclusionary paths, Rebecca, that you alluded to in the beginning of what you were saying, is that those programs simply don't, right? That they aren't necessarily equitable, that they aren't necessarily inclusive, that they aren't necessarily accessible to everybody that we would want to have as our population of teachers in the future, as our talent for the future there. So I think breaking down those barriers, but also at the same time intentionally bringing everyone together for intentional program design to ultimately strengthen, like, flexible, stackable, and packable, right? All that jargon of a pathway that can lead from, I mean, ideally like CTE and high school, right, all the way to and through building leaders, up to and including like principal, or even central office staff, ultimately all apprenticeable tasks. all apprenticeable occupations. I think that leads me to sort of this thinking about how we could use this intentionally to drive DEIA, to ultimately drive the engagement of underrepresented and underserved communities and populations, to engage people, to build an education talent pool that does share the same lived experiences as our students, to ultimately make them, more able to connect with and to relate to the students that they're teaching. I think I just sort of like to throw that out there. Yvonne, I heard you talk about sort of some of those intentional connections and the way you're building that, connecting students and communities. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So for us at CCE, our strategy is to engage underrepresented individuals and to diversify the profession primarily by centering the community colleges. The community colleges, as we know, a very accessible and affordable place to begin their teaching career. In fact, over half of the teachers in California started their teaching journey at a community college. And so what a ripe opportunity to really tap into the resources and assets that community college students have. As we know too, that community colleges serve very diverse individuals from all walks of life. And however, right now, the current teaching pathway there is riddled with barriers. And many of the students identify as first generation, BIPOC, low income. And so with these students, there needs to be an intentional invitation and recruitment of participants. So, really working with them, working with even paraprofessional CTE students, and to enroll them into community colleges. Like this could be really a great starting point for a lot of folks who may be career changers or new to the profession, new to teaching and want to learn more and possibly enter into the pathway. And so we find the community colleges being a very great place to start recruiting and retain teachers. And we think that, there really needs to be a changing of the narrative of teaching, of who can become teachers and what resources are available and accessible for them, because we know that with underrepresented individuals, these are essential in making sure that they're able to enter into the profession as well as to stay in the profession.
I love that connection to sort of that ed side, the way in which community colleges can play a part in this. And sort of from that, related instruction sort of side of the equation. I think Margarita, I'd love to ask you, from sort of the employer, from the rural community, that district lens, what's your plan?
Sure. I love that Yvonne in her first statement made a really good point, which is sometimes colleges don't keep track of where the graduates, if they actually do become teachers. And I think it's the same for K-12. I think in K-12, we need to have a movement, a mindset shift that we're not just getting kids to college, but we're getting them through college. And this apprenticeship model really supports that movement. I also, as I shared, I was a paraprofessional. I had to have another job on the weekends. I was a bartender. My name is Margarita, so I can make a really good margarita, by the way. But that's how I supported my family. And it's sad to see that 15 years later, paraprofessionals still have to have 2 or 3 additional jobs to have a livable wage, especially in a place like Summit County, where the cost of living, you have to have around a $90,000 income per household if you want to survive here. And so one of the things that we're doing is really demystifying what college can be and how accessible it can be to our communities that live in poverty, and also to our Hispanic and Spanish-speaking communities. As I mentioned, here our households that are living in poverty are needing multiple members to support financially or contribute financially to the home. And so sometimes students feel the pressure to graduate and go into the construction field or go work in the service industry. And some of the work that we've been doing with our parents is sharing the health factors of how these careers can maybe give you more money immediately. However, on the long term, they will deteriorate your health and they will cause strains to your body. You will not finish off with a good retirement plan or benefits packages. And so really ensuring that we're targeting that accessibility, because sometimes we find that there's a misconception that people that live in poverty don't value education, when in reality, it's just that they don't see it as attainable. And we've also been going into the high school and doing recruitment there with students, sitting at the lunch table with them, offering them snacks, and just listening to their concerns. Like, what is it about college that they don't see as a career pathway for them, and showing them that it is possible, right? And so we're really excited to have these 2 first apprentices, but then seeing them through and seeing how they can be our stories of success to influence more students to go through this method.
That all, I mean, really speaks to me in the way that, in the way that you're essentially working all the way down to really help, to help sort of, I think you said, demystify the way in which, sort of the impact of these programs of educator apprenticeships and opportunities in education that are, often overlooked maybe at their onset, because you can make money from day one, more money from day one in other occupations. And I think that sort of speaks back to that longitudinal program design and why it's so important to have, pathways up within education as well. It sounds like, as you've worked through all of these programs, Margarita, and sort of worked with people and worked in getting people into these programs, that, you learned that ultimately you have to really dig in. You've got to talk to the people that need to be in the programs. I think, Yvonne, we heard the same thing from you. I feel like I'd like to sort of maybe take that up a level, and MK, ask you sort of what lessons, as you've worked with folks like Margarita on the ground in districts, and then in other districts across the state of Colorado. I'm wondering, like, what lessons you've learned on that sort of state level lens.
Sure. I think there's so much excitement around this work, but there's a lot of noise right now. A lot of people are scrambling to figure out what's what in their state, what can they do to tap into the national landscape of this. And so going back to this demystifying idea that Margarita brought up, we're trying to do that same thing for our district partners. They are so overwhelmed with prioritizing the education of their students and managing their districts that incorporating a brand new program is a lot of work. And we know that. And I think that's the beauty of really what an intermediary can lend to this. It's helping to kind of cut through that noise. And one just short example here is that we started with all of our districts by sharing what we thought they needed, which was like an implementation playbook. And it was everything we thought they would need for a multi-year rollout. And nobody even opened it. It was way too much. So we were really trying to do more like just-in-time information delivery, technical assistant webinars, and share just what's needed and what is right in front of these districts so that they can better implement. So I think that's a lesson learned, and we've tried to pivot, and hopefully we can keep doing that.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add on this? Because I feel like everybody on the panel has probably had some lessons learned.
I'm happy to piggyback off. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to go ahead, Margarita?
I would agree with MK. And first of all, MK, the packet that you sent us was amazing. It was perfect. And yes, it's we are I have to say, like, in a district you're surviving, right? And it's like the next thing and the next thing. So this type of program requires you to look up and look ahead 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, and invest in the future. And that takes a lot of effort, and especially when we're dealing with things that matter right now, right? And so I do, I appreciate having you as a partner, and I appreciate that you validate that that concern, and that you guys have been great in going slow to move fast in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, I think, MK, that one of the things that's dawning on me too is what Yvonne said. You know, you're talking about how new this is. What Yvonne said in the beginning, right? California, this is the first of program registered with the Department of Labor. Like, tell us more about that, Yvonne.
Yeah. So teaching apprenticeships, they really are so new, and especially in California, we haven't really touched on it yet. But we think that there is an opportunity to re-envision the teaching pathway. Like, we shouldn't replicate what's not working. And so conceptually, like, I think for us, our lesson learned is really trying to envision something different, especially looking at things that are practices that might be outdated or maybe against traditional practices. And given the flexibility of apprenticeships, we've learned how to continually adapt to better address any equity gaps for our participants. And so I think one of the things, for example, we were debating between a cohort model versus like a personalized, like student-centered model for teacher apprentices. And so we went with the personalized student-centered apprenticeship because it provides different on-ramps for students wherever they are in their education. We thought about how funding might be able to go along with the student to support them along the way. So things like that, design kind of thinking to really re-envision something different.
I think I would just add, like, I sort of think I'm summarizing what everyone has said, but there's sort of two ideas I would foot stomp here. Is one, going back to Jonathan, how you kept using the word intentionality. And I think that is really, really key, is being intentional about how you design it. I mean, this has the ability to re-envision the teaching pathway and address career shortages and equity gaps, but that's only going to happen if there is intention behind the design. So I think that's one thing. And of course, you have to have the partners at the table to do that. But then the second thing I would say is that you also don't have to have everything right to sort of jump in and get your feet wet, right? Because that's not probably ever going to happen. And you're inevitably going to learn things along the way. And one of the great advantages of the apprenticeship model is that it is so flexible, right? So when you start rolling this out and you realize that you need to make a tweak, it's not impossible, and it's part of it, because apprenticeship is so customizable. So I guess I would encourage the go slow to go fast, but also don't be afraid to jump in and start a small pilot in order to figure out what the growing pains are going to be.
So, Rebecca, I think 100% yes, right? Partnerships are essential. Intentionality, going slow to go fast, planning to, sort of take that incremental approach, not let perfection be the enemy of the good. Yeah, all of those things that we say. But you make it sound so easy. Like, you make it sound so easy, and we all know it's not. So, like, let me just put it back to you and say, like, what's the biggest hurdle that you've encountered, and how did you get, go over it, under it, around it, or through it? And Rebecca, I think I'm going to turn that right back to you, since
Sure.
you made this process sound so effortlessly.
Absolutely. So I mean, specifically, I would say throughout this process, I think once you sort of understand the apprenticeship landscape and the logistics, as far as the, once you have the partners at the table and you're designing, I think specifically the biggest challenge has been um, gaining union support, because in order to operate a registered apprenticeship or a represented position, you need to have acknowledgement from the union if they're not going to be a joint sponsor with you, which is often the case in clients we're working with. So, I think that again is about a shift in the narrative and a shift in mindset. And so I think in order to overcome that, that's where you go back to having intermediary expertise, or those who have had those conversations, because ultimately the unions are actually gaining membership and it's addressing a lot of the shortages. So I think understanding the current CBAs in place and how to navigate those conversations. We have templates that we use to help our partners that we work with, have those conversations and gain support from the union. So that would be the most concrete example.
And I'll try and chime in, and this is pulling in some things that we've already mentioned, but we're all forerunners in this space. And sometimes that's just a challenge, right? To like launch something that's fairly new, whether it's to our states or to our districts. And I think really trying to tap into the folks that are already doing some of those pieces really well. I'm looking to you all on the call and others nationally who understand registered apprenticeship, understand teacher preparation, who have some really great qualities that we can tap into. And our group has committed to not saying we're building the plane and flying it, because we've built planes in the past. It might be a different model this time or some different features. So we're getting rid of that idea and saying we already know what we're doing. We're just putting our pieces together in a different way.
Yeah, I think, what MK just shared is super resonant to me. I think, for our work, I think the most challenging piece is just the sustainable funding for this work, especially for intermediaries, program sponsors. Everyone's always asking like, how are we going to do this work? How is this going to be funded? That's always the question we get from our partners. And so I think for us to address it, one of the biggest things is looking to other leaders who have been doing this work or who know apprenticeships or who know teacher ed. I know a lot of the term braiding funding keeps getting thrown around. And so that is being strategic about some of the funding sources we already have and trying to use those to help fund this work, applying for new grants, and being part of these types of groups where we learn from others who are already doing this work is key.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think you need buy-in, period, because too often projects are tied to one person, and then that person leaves and the project fails. And until you have buy-in from every single level of the organization, the efforts will not be sustainable. And when you have buy-in, you can figure out the funding. Like you can, when it brings value to an organization, they will do anything to maintain the funding stream. And so for us, it's been a while. It's taken me a while to be in alignment with our chief financial officer, with our chief academic officer, with our principals, with our parents, with our students, with our paraprofessionals. And I sound like a broken record, but it's okay, because I really ask them, what is the worst thing that can happen? I ask each one of them, what is your biggest fear if we take this on? And just listen and listen. And at the end of the day, we agree this is worth the risk of our biggest fears, because it is ultimately an investment in our future. So I think that without buy-in, this cannot be sustainable, and it cannot be one person's job. It has to be a commitment that's shared.
I love that. I think that that is so incredibly important, Margarita. You know, that sort of transformational thinking, right? This isn't about one person and one person's idea. It's really about sort of like systems level design and thought and the intentional engagement of stakeholders. And we've heard about, you know, like working with districts, and we've heard about working with community colleges. You know, we've heard about this, you know, working on the state level with state policymakers and how this works at the national level. We've heard about a little bit about funding. All of these elements are essential elements to program design and development. They all take, you know, sort of a community of people who are all bought into. And I think that's what you were getting at, Margarita, is like, it takes that community of people who are all working towards a shared vision. So I think that's super valuable. And thank you all so much for adding that. Well, I do want to say, anybody that has questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Because we're going to have time we're hoping to have time for questions here at the end. And because the next question I want to ask is sort of this idea of a rapid fire round. And so ready, here we go. Really pithy. 1, 2, and 3. I want to know 3 things. What are the first 3 steps that you each would take? Or if you were doing it again, starting a program again, what would the first 3 steps be for you starting your program? And let's start, actually, Margarita, I want to start back with you. You know, closest to the ground, doing this work in a district. What are your first 3 steps?
I love the concept of early adopters. I think that if you don't have a group of people that are rallying around a common vision, then it's really hard for that one person to drive alone. So find your early adopters, who are folks that are already aligned with that vision. And then 2, have a model for a pipeline, and where does this fit in that global model for your organization? And then finally, get to the root of the fear of folks. Is it that, you know, we are barely recruiting people now, and now we're adding another thing? People have to re-envision their purpose in the organization to fit this future forward thinking. So I think those 3 things will get you far. I mean, I'm hoping they get me far. So
I'll chime in. I would take 3 concurrent steps. Really think about the policy and what needs to change in your state to make this possible, because that's where we started. Engage your districts early on. They are half of your end user. The other one is the apprentice. So engage those folks, your districts, your potential apprentices, to make sure what you're creating works for them. And your state offices, your labor and employment, your state apprenticeship agency, higher ed, departments of ed, all of those people need to be on board and aligned.
For us, number 1, also cultivating, engaging, and convening partners early, and very often we're on texting basis with most of them, and they are with us from design all the way through implementation. So that's huge. 2, be nimbler, continue to learn, adapt, and improve because of the flexibility of apprenticeships, and you're constantly running up against barriers. Like, you always have to think about how to do things differently or how to adapt in that situation. And then work with state and federal labor agencies and apprenticeship experts, aka JFF and IAA. They were huge supporters and experts that we can lead into to be able to actually get our teacher apprenticeship registered and moving.
Some repetition here, but the first thing I would say is engage the partners, all the stakeholders, get them at the table. Secondly would be to understand the registration process in your state. And then thirdly, I would say identify and build off of the structures that you already have in place, because most people have 80% at least of of the structures in place of apprenticeship. So start there.
Yeah, Rebecca, I think that sort of speaks to something that MK said earlier, right? We're not building the plane while we're flying it, that we have all of the parts, and Marlene in the chat liked that statement. MK, I don't know if you saw that or not, but I think that really resonates, because we often think about how new and novel and cutting edge this is, and it's like, yeah, it is. It's new. We're on the forefront. Everybody that's listening today is here because they're either doing it, they're really interested in it, or they are, want to be interested in it. They're going to start doing it. But this is not something that everybody's been doing for a long time. But it is based on a lot of things that we've been doing for a long time. We're just really trying to re-envision the way we do those things so that they can be more intentional, that they can be less train and pray, that they can ultimately broaden the people who are able to access them. I think there are a couple things that have come up in our conversation today that I would love to dig into a little bit more. While we wait for more questions to come into the chat, I think one of the things that we hear about a lot is funding. How do we fund this? How do we pay for this? What does the funding look like? And Yvonne, you mentioned funding. And so I'm wondering if I can just sort of put this on you to start us off in a conversation about like how you have leveraged funding, what streams you've leveraged, how you've sort of blended and braided those together. And then I want to open that up to the rest of the panel as well to talk about more broadly. But tell us about your funding situation specifically.
Yeah. No, this is a great question. And it's still a challenge for us. We're still looking for like actual funding for intermediaries. But there, I think you mentioned it too, Jonathan, that, there is existing funding sources that maybe, the education sector may not be aware of, but the apprenticeship sector has long known about, and so there's different fundings for different entities, stakeholders within, so education institutions, for the actual employers. Like there are lots of funding sources. We have also been looking at like, work study, federal work study, there's it's called LEAP funding for students that helps to pay wages for employers. And so, now that we're starting to we come from the education sector, but now we're diving into the apprenticeship workforce development sector. It's kind of opened up a whole new pool of funding. We've also braided funding from the Department of Ed, for grants that we've applied for. We're looking to philanthropy. There's so much philanthropy relationships we've started to build to kind of introduce this program, as well as I know looking towards your workforce development boards. They are great resources in understanding more about the funding landscape for this type of work. And so I think it's now being more open to seeing what's already existing, as well as there's a lot of funding coming down through the pipeline too. We found out about, the community colleges do have some funding for apprenticeship work, specifically around teaching. There's other federal funding that's coming down the pipeline for apprenticeships because of the initiative to grow apprenticeships in the nation and the state. So, we had to look everywhere and think about how we can actually tie it all together so that there is funding for this work.
Yeah, I think that's all right. And I think that is an interesting element that you bring up in the funding stream, because typically in education, we're very familiar with education dollars. In workforce, we're very familiar with workforce dollars. But historically, like never the twain shall meet. And so I think that is an interesting, I think that's an interesting point that you raise, because now that we're talking about that intersection of education and workforce development in education and in educator apprenticeships, we're sort of merging those two together, which means that there are even more opportunities to blend and braid funding to both pay for things like related instruction, but also to pay for things like their wraparound services and supports that apprentices need, so that they can be successful in their apprenticeship and make sure that they're able to complete training to really be that talent solution we need in the future. So I think that's a really great point. Does anybody else have anything they'd love to, that they think would be helpful for our audience to hear about the way in which you've funded this? Margarita, I'm sorry, Rebecca, I see you're off mute, and Margarita, I'd love to see if you have anything to add from a district perspective.
So I was very careful not to commit to a grant yet, because of the fear that there existed already in this district about sustainability of grants. And so that's why we selected 2 paraprofessionals that we would just switch to that position. And that way it wasn't an additional add to our budget. It was just a natural transition. And so now that we have them, then we are going to think about how we can look for grants next year to support this, to include obviously more stipends for the mentor teacher, but then also to include test prep, because that's another thing, right? Like, they can go through their college career, but if they don't pass the praxis right now in Colorado, which that's the test to get licensed, then they don't become certified. So I think that's still work that Colorado is trying to do to reduce that. But we know that the praxis is another barrier that we still have not fully removed or figured out. So that's where our funding will be also focused on next year.
I just want to chime in and highlight, I think, the importance of connecting to your local workforce investment board, because that funding typically follows the individuals. So it's not necessarily at a program level, it's more at a participant level. However, as we're talking about targeting those who may not have had access to these opportunities, right, then it's very likely that they may qualify for some funding, and they have pots of money that can cover related instruction costs. It can provide OJT contracts and give money to employers to offset wages and supportive services. So I think I would definitely recommend that as a first place to start. I also just want this idea of braiding funding and this connection to grants. If you haven't gone after a grant yourself, often if you connect yourselves to intermediaries like CareerWise or IAA or JFF, often they are connected to grants. And so even if they can't support, like, there's not funds for the participant themselves, the technical assistance can be supported, but then will future probably leave to participant supporting. Like, this is all, it's kind of a small world once you get into it. And I think just asking the questions, because knowing, especially in apprenticeship, that there's training dollars for related instruction and training dollars for on-the-job learning, you can start asking your workforce boards, like, okay, you can fund this. Can you fund on-the-job training, because I have this grant that could fund the related instruction, right? So just understanding what the pots of money are and what they can fund. But I go back to what you said, Margarita, is like, you can't have one person doing all this, right? The capacity to have these conversations. And that's where it goes back to, again, engaging partners and those in the space, because especially as you're dipping your toes in, right, you leaning on the expertise of those who have done it already is time saving and a lot less stressful. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I feel like that brings us really full circle, because it is also back to building that broad buy-in. of stakeholders who are at the table, who are going to help you work with your workforce board, that are going to help you work with your related instruction providers, that are going to, ultimately that might help you with at the district level, figure out, program design, to work, MK, as you said, to work with the Department of Ed and the Department of Labor, right, on the way in which certifications and educator certifications across all levels of education can connect to and essentially be rendered work process and related instruction for apprenticeship. All of those things are take an interconnectedness, and I think that is such an important element of this, is that you can't do it alone. And Marguerite, I think it was you earlier that said, systems are vulnerable when initiatives are led by one person. And that is so vitally important, because if one person leaves a system, everything's gone. And so I think that, that would probably be my final thought, would be really to just have awesome partners at the table. I mean, I look to everybody on this call, as somebody who has invaluable experience in implementing it, designing and figuring out how to solve some of the problems. And they all feel really unique, but they aren't all incredibly, they aren't all unique. They just require, the adaptation of the way we've thought about things to new contexts. I want to take one more minute and say, Rebecca, Yvonne, MK, Margarita, what's your final thought on this?
I can start.
Do it.
Well, first of all, to Roberta Trachman, thank you for your email and for following me on LinkedIn. I've been getting requests on LinkedIn from folks that are on this call. Thank you for caring enough to be here today and to listening to us and what we have to say. I certainly am not an expert, but I can definitely listen to you and try to figure something out. I know that they will follow up with our contact information. And my last quote, I refer to from my mentor, George Welsh. He says, never let a good idea go to waste for lack of effort. So please, if this is something that you find vital to your organization, the future of your workforce, try it and take that risk. And thank you for today.
Oh, I'll pick up off of that same exact idea. My final thought for folks listening in is, you can do this. It might seem overwhelming at first, but just start moving forward. You can do this. It is possible, and you have a lot of folks out there who have done it, so lean on them.
Yeah, and very similarly, do it. we need teachers, we need educators, from who look like the students, who are from our communities. We need you to continue to do this work and be part of this work. And so let's see if we can be part of this sea change that's kind of happening right now. So
I would echo what everyone says. Thank you for joining us. I think the fact that you're here, you've already started doing it. I would say feel free to reach out. And I think one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this is because I think this really has the ability to make some really actionable change. And it starts with conversations like these. And it's not easy, and it takes a lot of time, but I think it is definitely worth it for the students in the end. So thank you for joining the conversation.
And I want to thank you all. I want to thank the people that are watching for coming today, for taking some time to hear from the panel. I want to thank the panelists for being awesome. I have really it's been my pleasure to facilitate a panel with all of you, because you're just awesome. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I think, as you said, there are resources out there. JFF has a bunch of resources for about youth apprenticeship, about DEIA in apprenticeship, and we actually have a DEIA rubric that is specific to education and educator apprenticeships coming out. So keep an eye out for that. CareerWise has a bunch of resources on their website. I know that Rebecca at IAA has resources as well. And I think even more so, feel free to reach out to anybody on the panel for information, to hear more, to connect. And Marguerite, I'm super happy to hear that people are already, hitting you up in your email, that they've already got you on LinkedIn. This is a great opportunity to connect. I really genuinely appreciate all of you. I appreciate everybody who came today to listen. And thank you all so much for being here. I guess with that, have an awesome rest of your day, everyone, and be in touch.